This
November
conference will now
2020.
be recorded.
Welcome to the November 2024 Arlington Senior Democratic Lunch. Our guest today is Commonwealth's Attorney Parisa Dehghani-Tafti, and we're going to let her make her opening remarks and have, I'm sure, a vigorous Q&A because we really have a hot bench here. And I want to thank you so much for coming today.
I didn't prepare too much because I was looking forward to the conversation. And I was trying to think through what horribles might happen. And as attorneys, we're very good at coming up with a parade of horribles. But then it became so long and unwieldy that I started categorizing, sort of like where are the areas that we're going to see some of the worst things happen. And I'll go through some of the areas I identified, and also a few things like within those, but this is certainly not like an exhaustive list. And like the range of likelihood, varies on some of these, but what things that I think are going to happen. Like I think there's obviously like a war on women. We're going to see that in reproductive health. I think we're going to see that in things that matter to me and what I do as the CA. Is like the Violence Against Women Act, and the money that goes to various organizations for that. I think we're going to see sort of it. I think next time it's up for renewal, we may not see it get renewed, and we may see the programming that we've had under it, for domestic violence victims dismantled. I think that it's going to be harder to get divorce, especially for women. I think that there's going to be some kind of like economic restrictions. We've seen that in other countries when the goal has been to treat women like second-class citizens. And I think that I know that there's been some talk of repealing the 19th Amendment, but they don't even need to do that to make it harder for us to vote. They can pass they can pass laws that make it harder to vote. And the fact that they're even talking quietly about the 19th Amendment is pretty alarming. Uh, uh, we're going to see a deregulation. Sorry?
I don't think I've ever heard that. No. It's really kind of repeal the 19th Amendment.
They're talking about it.
Who is saying it? Where do you hear it?
The Steve Miller and Bannon and those folks. But and Musk has said that we should have what did he call it? Somebody joked that it was the oligarchy, but it was an elite group of white men and neurodiverse men appointed to run the country. But it's really clear to me that there is going to be attacks on women, and I think that the only thing that might stop it is our economic power, and exerting our economic power. I'm anticipating a deregulated state, like and any agency that puts obstacles in front of corporate profits, I think is going to see it's dismantling or it's becoming anemic. Yeah.
And a good example of that is the Chevron doctrine was repealed by the Supreme Court.
Exactly.
So something that seems sort of like small one court case actually applies to every agency.
Exactly. And we're and like they already are talking about like changing clean water and clean air regulations. So I think we're going to be like we're just not going to be as healthy as we have been. Obviously, tax cuts, which are going to affect, the master plan has always been to starve the government and then say the government doesn't work and then privatize it. Exactly. And, and it's harder to rebuild than it is to dismantle. Uh, so, I think that we're going to see that sort of privatization. Like they've already explicitly said that they want to do that with the Department of Education and public schools. Uh, and I think that the part of Project 2025 that is going to require military like health exams for public school kids, but not private school kids. Is that's to drive people towards private schools. Um, I think that we're going to see a concentration of power in the executive branch. Uh, sorry. Yeah. Well, I mean, we're going to see it. We're going to see it in the we've already heard about using military, to disperse protests. But even if we don't get to the point where we're talking about like the military against citizens, I think giving police more immunity and allowing them to engage in greater use of force already does that. And that's been explicitly talked about. Um, the idea of dissenters, journalists, electeds, politically involved people, activists, being imprisoned or silenced is very, very real. Uh, and there's already been very open discussions of purging non-loyal civil servants from the agencies to make sure that they're answerable to what the president wants. In terms of immigration, I think we're going to see the camps expand. They're going to try to deport everybody that they can up until it has a very real economic impact. Uh, uh, they've made noises about eliminating and reversing birthright citizenship. They've made noises about reversing naturalization. I mean, we have laws in place that can reverse naturalization.
Isn't the birthright the 14th Amendment?
14th, yeah. Uh, but they can reverse naturalization. We already have statutes in place that allow for reversal of naturalization. They can not only be expanded, but they can be expanded so that it sort of covers wide swaths of people. Like we usually only do it for war criminals, right? But there's no reason why it.
Here. Chili is here in the Harari too. But I think the point you're making, which is a very good one, is that even if the Constitution says X, it always takes a judicial system to honor that
Exactly.
and to apply it. And for example, even though the Constitution specifically says if you're born in the United States, you are a citizen of the United States, there are exceptions.
Right.
For example, if you're a diplomat coming here to be like ambassador or something, and you have a child, that child is not entitled to
Right.
a birthright citizenship. But
Right.
please continue. Don't let me
No,
interrupt.
no, that's actually that is exactly the point. Like we trust in we trust in our Constitution, but none of the rights that are outlined in our Constitution are without some limits and without some exceptions. Apparently, yes. um, but but even that we do. Like we don't let people who have felony convictions possess guns. We don't let people who have, domestic violence convictions possess guns for now. Um, so, but Bob is exactly right, and that's actually a much better way of putting it, is that there everything can be curtailed to a point where we're living in a place that we don't really recognize. And we talk about the fact that we have like a free press, but like all that really means is that we don't have state-run press. Like that doesn't mean that the press really is going to be criticizing the government without like
Bezos already.
exactly, like we've already seen compliance. Um, and I mean, I think that obviously, like any of the privacy rights that we've talked about, that have been read into the Constitution by the Supreme Court, like those are going to, those are at stake. LGBTQ rights, contraception, exactly. And I think that it's very clear that there's a Christian nationalist uh, intention. And so even if there's no declaration about that happening, it's they can do enough that is de facto what we are living in. Uh, and so and we can't really. I don't know that we're going to be able to rely on things like the ACLU or the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, or the Women's March or other advocacy organizations that are 501c3s, because they've already tried last year and failed. But it's up. Trump is asking for it to be brought up again. But there was legislation to expand what the language of to strip 501c3 status from organizations that now the new legislation would say may be affiliated with terrorist organizations. And we already have multiple statutes in place that would strip that for organizations that are funding terrorism, but the may be terroristic language is really problematic, because all you have to do is say, oh, well, they may be doing that, and call what they're doing terrorism, and then you're stripping the 501c3 status of major organizations that have supported civil liberties.
People could still do that, support that.
But they wouldn't be 501c3s.
They would lose their
They would
tax
lose their
exempt
tax-
status.
I don't know. It could. Yeah. The bigger ones maybe not, but the smaller ones quite possibly.
But you have another half page, so let's hear the rest of your horror list.
So there's more horror lists, but I think the point, I think, is that we need to be clear-eyed about what's happening, and like sort of get out of this state of not being able to imagine these things, and start to figure out how, like, what the resistance looks like. And the resistance doesn't look like marches anymore. It doesn't look like overt, sort of like open planning in the way that we did in 2016 and 17. I think that what we're going to have to do is find ways to decentralize the way that information is shared, to make it, and to focus on actions that disrupt the system in ways that are effective, but that can't be used then, like, weaponized against us. So like a march can be weaponized against us, and it doesn't do very much, right? Because the people can be rounded up. It's an excuse to deploy the military or police forces. But if we do things like civil disruption, like en masse turning off our electricity for 5 hours a day, that's going to have a massive effect on the or like stop buying things. That's going to have a massive effect on uh, the the bottom line, really, and it's going to have a very disruptive effect on the economy. And but nobody can fault you for doing that, right? Like nobody can come knock on your door and force you to buy things. They can't force you to turn your electricity on. And so like we need to be sort of like organizing around those kind of disperse uh, uh, actions. And obviously, and really sort of put like organize sort of local communities that are, sort of maintain their discipline in what sort of the plans are as things unfold. So, um, and as far as like criminal justice reform goes, like even on the best of days, they were coming after reform prosecutors like me, with the recall, with, sort of threats in our DMs, with threats otherwise. Like I've had to, to call my kids' schools at one point and tell them to please don't let my kids go outside. I've had to ask the police department to do extra checks at my house. My staff are all on the sort of like uh, list of people that the police can get dispatched to quickly should something happen. But that's because there's very real uh, threats about harm. And we've seen like frivolous prosecutions by the government against some of the reform prosecutors. So I think that at this point, the right wing just feels more empowered to do that, and the national government is going to feel for all the talk about states' rights and I think that what we're going to start seeing is like what matters isn't states' rights but red states' rights, and that there's going to be that they're going to feel empowered to impose the national agenda on areas like Arlington and blue localities and blue states. Uh, I don't have all of the answers, but this is just sort of like where my thinking is right now. Um,
Let me ask
yeah.
the first or second question, and this comes from a perspective of a civil lawyer. And I know you're a criminal lawyer, but if you dial back 20 years ago and your clients wanted to do business in the former Soviet Union, okay, what would happen is instead of America would write just a very short contract because everybody understands what the body of law is and can trust the courts to
Yeah.
fill in the gaps and so on. People started coming up with standardized contracts that were the size of the Manhattan phone directory, literally.
Uh-huh.
And they would just attach it to every one of their contracts as, this is sort of like Appendix A, which
Right.
is which states all of your assumptions and
Right.
the way you want things to happen and
Yeah.
everything. And if you imagine a world where people of a certain viewpoint don't trust the courts anymore, don't trust the courts anymore for the contract where I'm renting out my room to Joe or something, isn't that sort of Appendix A, the size of the Manhattan phone book, a way for private contracting to get around that? Because, for example, if I were a nonprofit and I wanted to make sure that my grantees were working towards certain goals and behaving in a certain way, by attaching a detailed document the size of the Manhattan phone book, I would really have the private rights to back that up and not necessarily rely upon the court to make all the assumptions that I would make. So you see that as sort of and we all know that Republicans believe in the sanctity of contract. But isn't that sort of a device to get around some of what you're foreseeing?
I don't think so. Uh, because I honestly think that we're in this realm where the things that we're used to and the norms are all gone, and we don't really know like what's going to be in its place other than like whatever is good for Trump, you know? So I don't know the answer to that, and it I don't know that it will protect anyone ultimately. Um, so that yeah, I mean yeah,
Okay,
I just
well,
don't know.
I'm just looking for something
Yeah.
useful for Democratic lawyers to do. But you're certainly entitled to your perspective, and I certainly think that what I just suggested has had no applicability to criminal laws at all. But I hear you.
I don't have the expertise in I mean constitutional law. Uh, I do, but um,
Okay, well let's talk about constitutional law for a second.
some of it.
So what's sort of interesting is we've had the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, and I think everybody in this room loves the idea of the Equal Protection Clause and so on. And then recently we had the Students for Fair Admission to Harvard, where they argued sort of reverse discrimination against Asian students applying to Harvard. And so it came time to write a equal rights amendment for the New York State Constitution. And that was actually on the ballot on November 5th and got adopted. And what it was they changed the one sentence of equal protection and don't discriminate based on race, religion, and so on to two paragraphs. The first paragraph added a bunch of stuff like, pregnancy and marital status and sexual orientation and so on. But the second paragraph said,
So it outlined the protected classes, so they're not relying Supreme Court precedent for what's a protected class.
so that long list instead of a short list, and pregnancy and so on, because they wanted to get abortion in there somehow. But then paragraph number 2 was sort of explicit language that if there is a discrimination that is created by a statute provision or policy that is, quote, designed to fight discrimination, that is constitutionally permissible. Sort of essentially writing an anecdote to the Students for Fair Admission decision. And that actually got put in by the New York State Legislature. It was, in fact, adopted by the citizens of New York State. I think that is a very interesting solution, but there's a horrible problem if the discrimination case somehow goes beyond the New York State courts into the federal courts, where they've got the plain old 14th Amendment that is just the flat prohibition against discrimination.
Well, in theory, the states are supposed to be allowed to impart more rights than the federal government does. So like the federal constitution is the floor, and the states are supposed to be allowed to give you more, not less, rights through their constitution. But this is again this is assuming we live in a world where states have states' rights. And so yeah, I think that you could do that, and that's certainly what our General Assembly is trying to do. Thank you, our General Assembly. Thank you. With abortion and hopefully with gay marriage and some other issues, but that and like California had, I don't know the details of it, but I know that Newsom's already laid out a plan and called a special session of the legislature. We can do all of those things. I think that we need to have a plan like that needs to be plan A, and then plan B needs to be what happens when only certain states gets rights, or like when they want to dismantle the ability of states to do that, then what happens?
Well, there'll be a lot of litigation on federal preemption questions. I mean, if you're thinking about a career as a newly graduated lawyer, go into federal preemption law.
Yeah.
That's the growth area,
Yeah.
right?
But and so like we've lived in a world too where Republicans have for the most part wanted to constrain the power of the federal government, and we've used things like the Commerce Clause to constrain the power. It's going to be interesting to see those same people try to expand the power of the federal government now.
It's not the same people.
Right.
It is and it isn't.
But everybody, Paul and so on, please project your voices so we can pick it up on the recording.
And the other piece of this is if it's all going to get to this Supreme Court, like that's really problematic. So, because I don't think any of these people are constrained by intellectual honesty or anything, or the rule of law. I think that they know what they know what they want the outcome to be, and they are manipulating or just outright rejecting. Yeah. So.
Okay, but what about the institutionalization? I mean, we all assume that the constitutional provision limiting someone to 2 terms still applies, right? And
I hope so.
yeah, okay, well, go ahead and argue with me, but so presumably in 2028, someone other than Donald Trump will be on the ballot for the Republicans. Well, that's another interesting argument.
Would exist. I would think he would be, because of this, maybe this is, I would think a lot of things, but I am not confident that we will.
Okay, but just for my thought experiment here, I'm asking everyone in the room to assume that in 2028 Trump is not on the ballot, and we're having a presidential election in 2028. Yes, it might be J.D. Vance, but how do you institutionalize whatever reforms the Trump administration will make? Because obviously, executive orders and federal regulations and so on are somewhat easily overturned. Other things like constitutional amendments take a long time to produce and ratify. Court appointments last beyond the end of the tenure of the current president. So you sort of see certain things shifting momentum one way or the other. And there's also the ambiguity of how does person X claim to the Trump agenda and the Trump mandate. So here I am, and I'm a Republican, and it's 2028, and I'm a candidate for president. What do I have to do to claim the leadership of the group of people that put Trump into office in 2024? And that, I think, is a very interesting question for people to discuss. But, I know no one has solid answers to any of that.
I don't have the answer to that.
Okay.
I think so that we need to think of so far. You got chicken. Fresh chicken.
For next year, the governor's taking with you.
Right, there's elected government that there are people who get is very much against interest. And I think that there are people who are not going to find that grab hold. If we really take it from here, one way or the other, what's good for him. And it's just, putting these projects before looking.
Depends on how much they've changed the rules to make it harder for people who would unelect them to vote. Or have they made an environment such that people are afraid to run against them? I mean, I think we have to consider those things. I mean, I think what we need to do is it's twofold, right? It's to try to maintain some political power, but it's also to be ready for, you know, resistance in a way that doesn't look like traditional political organizing. You know, because like it may not be enough to get out the vote, you know.
It didn't totally stay out here. So I think we need to look at what we did right and expand on that. We talk about these awful, Republicans are awful, but I think it's cost us an election.
Oh, yeah. No,
I think it cost us an election by making that our, I think Terry McAuliffe, when he ran, making it about Trump, cost us an election. I think we can't continue to make it about what they might do. I don't think we can. They might do all those things, every last thing you said, but if we make it about that, we will not.
Oh, I'm not suggesting that we make it about that. Before you came, I was talking about how we need to have like a populist economic agenda and like start even using some of the language that FDR used uh, to really lay out that people have like economic rights. So like the message is not political. You know, like what I'm saying is not about like political messaging. What I'm saying is like we need to organize, and we need to organize in ways that we haven't imagined before. And then you know we have the strong the messages that are about you know making people's lives better, about giving them more opportunities, and about you know fairness and opportunity. But you know, like the conditioned precedent for that needs to be that we can do those things, right? That we can run people and organize people. And so in order to do those sort of traditional political organizing, we need to be ready and to do a different kind of organizing and to engage in civil resistance.
But civil resistance really didn't work that well in the first Trump administration. You know, there was the Million Woman March and all these other
Yeah,
things.
well, that's what earlier I was saying. Like marches don't work. Like that's not what works anymore. If you look at sort of the history, like what you need is like, and I just learned this. You need 3.5% of the population constantly, consistently disrupting things. And those disruptions can look like work stoppages. They can look like strikes. They can look like boycotts. They can look like, you know, some of like turning off your electricity, not buying things. Those like we need to be creative about what is going to be like disrupting the status quo, but also protects us so that we're not, you know, sort of we're not able to be targeted. And you know, but like the large marches, like people like mobilizing and showing up for one thing, that doesn't because it like for the last 30-40 years like that not been effective.
Sorry.
Sorry? Oh, yeah, nothing. Yeah, so like,
You know, the kind of folks get together, it's like one big party, like they all.
Right.
do something like 4 p.m.
Yeah.
Friends, like they do friends.
yeah.
We create a headline.
You know, they do that.
And we may need to do those things as part of a strategy. But that can't be the only thing we do. And you know, we need to do things that have more of an impact. You know, like the bus boycotts in the 60s, right? Like those, you know, like that was decentralized, it was sustained, it had an economic impact. You know, we need to find those kinds of ways of responding to make it bad for the people who have power and the corporations, you know, to make it not to make sort of keeping that system going, to disincentivize it, to make it economically unfeasible.
That's very much needed for economic power. That's people first thought is how does it affect me? I know personally, and you know, okay, he's not there and he says this and that, but
But they say, I'm not sure, I mean,
you know, there's those-
It didn't matter what your personality is, it's about our bottom line. Whether you're extremely rich or you're extremely kind of,
I mean, it's all across the board.
right,
And really, that's when you, before you think.
right, or you're easily swayed.
Exactly.
Okay, but folks, please project your voice because we have to hear it over here. Okay, well, does anyone have a specific question for Parisa so we can take advantage of her presence here today? Because she's the font of all answers. I have one. I think that generally speaking, crime was not a big issue in this campaign. I mean, both Trump and Harris present themselves as pro law and order. You know, vote for me and you'll have law and order. But it really wasn't the big issue in the campaign. I think in local, more local elections, you do have crime problems. You know, we can't have mass school shootings. We can't have this or that sort of horrible example of horrible crime. And I think some people perhaps voted for Trump because they were worried that society was losing control of the crime and so on. Given that, you know, what can local politicians and law enforcement officials do? Because so much of crime, other than at the border, is within the control of local entities.
So I do think crime was a big part of the Trump campaign. I think that
But
the
it's
part
hard
of
with immigration.
Right.
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 He made them the same issue.
right.
Okay.
And I think that, you know, your question is built on an assumption that that local officials control crime, and we don't really understand crime in this country, and we haven't studied it closely enough to do what it takes to reduce it. Some of the things that we know are that, for example, prosecution is not what deters people. If prosecution and penalties deterred people, Mississippi and Alabama would be the safest places in the entire country because they have the death penalty, right? But places that have the death penalty actually have more horrific crimes and more homicides. So, we know that like the punishment does not deter the action. Well, we know that some of the things that deter the action are the certainty of getting caught. So like that is like investing in smart policing and community policing, as opposed to sort of like militaristic policing. We know things that, and we know that, and we have known for more than 100 years that when we have poverty, when we have lack of socioeconomic mobility, when we have lack of opportunity, when we have unemployment, when people don't have hope, when we don't have health care, when we don't have mental health care, those are the things, those are the sort of like circumstances that lead to higher crime rates. And I think that we're going to see higher crime rates, just like we did after the first Trump administration and COVID, because like we're going to see the fault lines in society. And like when we break the social contract, we can't really expect people to abide by the social contract. And then there's going to be a lag of like 2 years before we start seeing it. But that's my prediction. And the things that local people, like what we can do locally, is try to take care of people in our communities. Try to make sure that people have housing. Try to make sure that people have food, that they have health care, that they have mental health care, that they are able to attend school. And the problem with like what is going to happen, what we're anticipating will happen nationally, is that we may not have funding for public schools. So then what do we do? We may, we may sort of have no rigorous information on, like medical issues and health issues. Then what do we do? If we don't have like some federal funding and grants, like so much of what we do locally is dependent on federal grants. Like my diversion programs are dependent on federal grants. The most van that DHS has is dependent on federal grants. A lot of the stuff that we do,
What was that?
the most van, they have a mobile mental health care van, and yeah, and I mean, we need to expand it, but it basically is like it's outreach to people who are disaffected, people who are unhoused. If there's a call that comes into the emergency center, and it's a mental health call, like they can make the decision to route it to the most van, so that social workers and clinicians are responding. Department of Human Services are Mhm. Clinicians, yeah.
So they're mental health professionals.
Right. But that's a $1.6 million grant, I think, that they got from the federal government. Like if the federal government isn't getting those grants, we're not going to be in a position to do those things, unless we independently have the funds to do that. So,
Anecdotal question, I guess, or not a. So, January 6th, directing law enforcement, just in your with law enforcement. I mean, so that's one thing that's also sort of, I think it has been true that law enforcement has tended to sort of lead in public challenges. Did you notice, just in your own experience, any loss of support after being no, it lost support, and so we didn't either, but
I mean, I think I also have, you know, no law enforcement agency is perfect, but I work with multiple agencies. The two that I work most closely with are ACPD and Falls Church, and the people that I interact with are not the rank and file. So I have like a little bit of a different perspective. You know, I think that there are plenty of people who believe in the rule of law, but I think, but like that's today,
But you're now in the middle of your second term. So you've been here for what, 6 years?
But
5, okay. And isn't there a trade association of all of the Commonwealth's attorneys in the state of Virginia?
Mhm.
And it's a sort of bipartisan thing because some are Republicans, some are Democrats. So what feelings have you picked up from those interactions statewide?
So I haven't been with that group yet since last week. So I am curious what I will like. There's been like silence in terms of uh, like email traffic, that sort of thing. So I don't know sort of where everybody else is at. My hope is that that they believe in like what we traditionally think of as the rule of law, but I don't know.
But over the last 5 years, and not just in the last week, but over the last 5 years, you know, it's not as though the people that live in Southwest Virginia are just a completely different species from Mars or something. They're people that have law enforcement challenges in their community. What is the center of gravity of law enforcement in the state of Virginia in terms of expectations? Everybody loves federal grants, or
I mean, uh, I I mean everybody relies on federal grants, even for some of the equipment that they have in police departments. Um, you know, there's a disproportionate number of, so we're 120 Commonwealth attorneys in Virginia, which is a lot. Like California only has 54, basically, yeah. And like I mean, there are like jurisdictions that have like less than 15,000 people that have like literally only like one person, only the elected, and they don't even have court every day because like sorry, uh, but uh, uh, so it's like the Senate where, but like the ones that are like the real Democrats and part of this progressive coalition, we represent 40% of the population, but we're like 9 people, out of 120. So it does very much lean on the right wing side of politics. But I can't paint everybody with the same brush because there are things that like the guy in Wise County and I like 100% agree on, like certain issues, like treatment, uh, like making sure that innocent people are not in prison. Like those are two, but weirdly, like Colin Stolly in Virginia Beach, like is not there. So like in some ways I have more in common with like the Wise County guy than I do with somebody in a more populous area. But so yeah, I don't have a sense, but they do tend to be on the more right side of things.
What? So just looking at Trump's legal issues, we have seen 2 strong, really professional, good judges, and one not so much. What it or it? What I don't really understand. Justice, I mean, what pressure can they be put under?
So state judges in most places are elected, not in Virginia. They're appointed by the General Assembly in Virginia, but in New York, they're elected. And so the pressure is, you know, whether or not they'll get elected, for good or bad decisions, right? And in the federal system, they have lifetime appointments. And so there's not a lot you can do.
Like, whatever the guy.
Canon.
No, not
Oh.
her, the two, the New York guy and then the woman here in DC. They're
So the woman in DC, I think, is federal judge, and then the New York guy is a state judge. That was Alvin Bragg, the New York City, like,
District
yeah,
attorney.
yeah,
For Sean, that's the
yeah,
insurance.
state court. So the judge is a state judge.
They call them Supreme Court justices just to make them feel good, but they're the lowest trial court. It's state.
Very weird.
I love New York.
The nomenclature is very strange in New York.
And by the way, we do have the official cookie here. So, but when I ran for re-election as chair of this body, I ran on the campaign that we will distribute the cookies.
And I don't mean for all of this to be like super doom and gloom. I just like I've been frustrated with like the lack of imagination that I'm seeing around me. And so, you know, like I mean, just sort of like online when I talk to like when I'm like taking a walk with my neighbor, you know, and I don't know if it's, you know, like if it's because like I am particularly exposed, or, you know, or if like I'm just trained that way, you know, but, you know, I think we, you know, we should engage our imaginations a little bit better about what can happen so that we can prepare. Not so that we'll be paralyzed, but so that we can prepare and plan and strategize.
Being our son, really one of the problems in this past election was that Democrats tried to vote the rules, they tried to be nice, and that just doesn't always work.
I mean, it's not. I don't even know that you have to play dirty. I think you just can't rely on norms. Yeah. So like, yeah.
What happens to the federal government? And
I know that the ACPD is not really interested in at least what I've heard is like, you know, that they're not, you know, really interested in engaging in that. I don't see the county board doing anything but standing up for immigrants. I think that if the civil service gets decimated, we're going to see an economic impact because we have so many federal workers that live here. So,
But whenever you see an area in economic decline, just speaking generally, there always tend to be more law enforcement challenges in terms of
Right.
evictions and you know, adequate health care
Right.
and all that stuff.
right. And then if you have more people being evicted because they can't afford to pay their rent, and more people becoming unhoused, and you know our shelters already have a 40-person wait list. And then you know you add this, and like we know that they want to make being unhoused and like on the street criminal. So then you're like what you're doing is then putting more people in jail for it. So
There was a Supreme Court case involving Grant Pass, Oregon, which literally adjudicate whether it's constitutional to have a
Yeah.
vagrancy law.
There was an article today about the poor problem in prison. So excited.
That's all.
I know that Parisa has a stop at 1 o'clock, so do you want to just?
oh yeah, I do. It's I mean, I think I kind of said it already, like I'm heartened to live here, where I think that we are going to do a lot of organizing. I think we'll probably be at the forefront of some of the work on this. And, like, I think we need to do both things, like political engagement, but also like strategic planning on, how to be like an actual resistance.
Well, we want to thank her for coming. It was so generous of your time spent with us, and let's give her a round of applause.
What I heard is